Hi everyone, Sandman here. This video is brought to you by a donation from Orlando, and here's what he has to say. Hi Sandman, you've been a huge influence on me joining the MGTOW community this year. I feel like I've been on the road to MGTOW since I was in junior high when I realized that there was something wrong about girls and how they reacted to celebrities. Maybe even before that when I was 4 years old and my neighborhood girlfriend huffed and puffed and stomped the doors because I wasn't playing He-Man the way that she wanted me to. MGTOW has also opened my eyes up to the idea of gaslighting. I don't have a topic for you, so feel free to do whatever subject you've been itching to do. I would, however, like to ask your help with something. I've included a link that you can actually review, and if you feel it's appropriate, I'd ask you to share it to your community to basically try and help out my baby boy get back into my arms. It's just one thing I can do to help fight for my son. Thank you for all the effort that you put into your consistent content. And cheers. Well, Orlando, thanks for your donation as well as your topic. I put the GoFundMe link in the description in case anyone wants to check it out. If anyone wants to read your story, they can pretty much check it out there. As for my topic, how many times have we actually heard that when men go their own way, if they don't have kids, we are actually committing genetic suicide? The reason I thought about this is because recently I learned that my brother would be having a kid, and I would forever be known as Uncle Sandman. I'm happy for him as much as I can be, but it's not my responsibility. It's pretty much not my circus and not my monkey. For some reason I became interested in how much DNA I would be sharing with that niece or nephew, and if I actually have a child of my own. If I have a kid of my own, then 50% of the DNA is in that child. If you have a grandchild, the amount of DNA or genetic investment you put into that kid is roughly 25%. Also, as an uncle, you have 25% of the DNA that will also be found in your niece or nephew. Looking at things that way, you actually start to change your perspective. Each generation after you has half the DNA that you once had. A child 10 generations out will only have 0.2% of your DNA concentrated in any one individual out there. Sure, you'll have 2,000 or more direct descendants at that point, but you will only have 0.2% of your genetic heritage in any one individual. The further out, the less and less you have. If you're an aunt or an uncle, you will only have 0.1% of your DNA scattered in any one individual, assuming that there's no inbreeding. So 500 years out, there really isn't anything left of the recipe that made you. All that's left are the ingredients scattered around thousands of different individuals. And because my brother is having a kid, I think realistically about the differences between having 0.1% of my DNA in 2,000 different individuals versus 0.2% in those same 2,000 people 10 generations out. You're essentially dissolving into the gene pool, and this is a great argument for going your own way. Your genetic legacy as a man going his own way is secure if you encourage your sister or brother to have kids while you stay single and enjoy life. You can let them deal with the earlier death, crazy relationships, early morning baseball practice, and for what? So that 10 generations out, what actually makes you is now scattered and diluted to hell. In the end, everything you teach your kids or anyone out there will be lost as new technologies and ideas replace them. Your genes will be atomized in the gene pool. But let's say that, for example, our technological civilization continues to develop, and eventually your descendants have access to all your photos, videos, writing, and other data that you collected throughout your lifetime. What are the odds that they're even going to look you up 10 generations from now? You will be nothing more than one of 2,000 descendants. They will be able to pick and choose which ones to look at and which ones to avoid. Obviously, the ones that were part of history and did great things will be the ones that everyone looks at, and not those that had a simple life and never really accomplished anything extraordinary. 20 generations from now, if you have kids, you will have 4 million descendants, and what are the odds that they're actually going to look back on your life to see what you did, even if the data is even there? 3 or 4 generations back is pretty much all that most people care about, and I know this because I have many old family photo albums from the 1960s and before that I actually picked up at Goodwill. People don't care about what their descendants look like, or they just throw away their possessions in the trash and then go about their business. I'm lucky enough to have an old military sword that belonged to my grandfather that I never actually got to meet. I'm also grateful to have about 10 paintings by my great-grandfather which he painted when he was a young man. Those are reminders of where I came from, but with my great-grandfather, I only share 1/8 of the DNA. I also know that 2 of my great-grandfathers died during the First World War, and my final one died of tuberculosis back in the 1930s. Of the 4 of them, the only artifacts I have are the paintings from one of them. I think it's kind of sad that an entire lifetime amounts to a handful of paintings or a sword, and everything else about that person being completely forgotten. So for all the critics and skeptics out there attacking men going their own way, if they're receptive to your words and ideas, point out to them how little of your DNA actually survives 10 generations out, and how little of your personal possessions survive when you die, and how you are forgotten. We hear the bullshit line all the time, you're not forgotten so long as people that supposedly love you still remember you. But what happens when they die? What happens to your memory then? If I had to pick a religion or philosophy, I'd say that I would be a Buddhist. Elevated Tibetan Buddhist lamas have apparently achieved such a spiritual ability that they can identify the location of their remanifestation as a tulka, a person that is reborn. They often write deathbed letters with all of that information in them. But even then, according to them, it's not the same person, it's simply their spiritual essence, it's not a carbon copy or duplicate of that person. A new tulka has things to offer in his own right. I know that many of you think I'm absolutely crazy, but I think there's so much truth in Tibetan Buddhism. If it's true, then the new person would become like a Trill symbiont from Star Trek, with some of the memories in a new body to carry them, and new memories to make. Maybe in the future, if we get really good at recognizing tulkas or rebirth Buddhists, we will have the ability to record their memories and give back those memories and experiences that they once had in a previous life, and then allow them to access all of those memories. I know it sounds like a sort of weird marriage between science fiction and Buddhism, but wouldn't something like that be cool? But getting back to this idea of not having kids and how it impacts your life. The most interesting people I know are interesting because they were able to pour their energy in what they were doing in life instead of burning themselves out, making copies of themselves. I also forgot to mention this, but what happens to everything I just spoke about if in the future we develop the technology to splice together genes and create designer babies that are less prone to cancer and other physical ailments? All that work you and millions of others have put into passing down your genes, and in the end it's some fat guy at a computer screen deciding that the only good part of your DNA is the part that actually dictates the length of your pinky toe, and the rest gets thrown out into the evolutionary scrap heap. I now laugh when people say millions of years of evolution and it all ends at you, implying that somehow you let down all those people that sacrificed to have kids and raise the next generation in the past. The next time someone criticizes you like that, make them aware of how little of your DNA actually ends up being together in the future. I could understand the argument if you were making a copy of yourself and your genes would last forever. But the only thing that's really lost are the last evolutionary changes that you made to your DNA, and those are so tiny they might as well be non-existent, because it takes hundreds if not thousands of generations before we see meaningful changes to our genetic code. Reproduction is not one long unbreakable line, but instead it's more like an hourglass in shape. To produce you, it takes a wide range of descendants at the top. There are exponentially less and less of them until they create you in the middle of the hourglass. You are the point where the sand moves through. Then at the bottom of the hourglass, your genes get spread out once again to create new people and exponentially return to nothingness. Instead of saying that we come from dust and then we return to dust, it's more like we come from a huge pool of relatives dozens of generations back, and then we scatter into millions or billions of other relatives dozens of generations down the line. This happens regardless of if we procreate or not. If our cousins or brothers or sisters have kids, then those genes aren't lost, they're simply less dense by one generation, because you choose to quote-unquote be selfish and didn't do your part to propagate the species. In a sense, you're a genetic slacker or freeloader. You're allowing others to sacrifice their lives like soldiers on the battlefield while you dodge the draft and stay at home banging all the women that lost their husbands on the front lines. I would say that men that have gone their own way have pretty much weaseled their way out of their responsibilities in the eyes of the rest of society. In popular culture, I've seen this in Star Trek: The Next Generation, where Captain Picard goes off to explore the stars while his brother sits miserably on the family farm with his son, slowly going crazy. Picard doesn't feel the need to have kids because his brother is already doing it and therefore his legacy will be passed on. The responsibility is no longer his. Unfortunately, in the Star Trek Generations film, his nephew is killed, and he has an emotional breakdown. You'd think that someone like him would realize how much your DNA gets scattered from generation to generation. That's why I think that male last names are a feeble attempt to turn the DNA hourglass into something that resembles an unbroken chain to convince men to procreate. The most interesting relatives I know today went their own way and are still in their 80s living extraordinary lives and have the best of tales to tell. I'll get a chance to see them again this coming May in San Francisco, where they live. Other relatives that are interesting have kids, but the children often end up being neglected because either you can work on making your own life great or your kids. And if you make the kids' life great and spoil them, then you pretty much ruin their life that way as well. The more I think about this, the more I realize that the only way to leave a lasting mark is to invent something like Nikola Tesla's induction motor that will probably be used for thousands of years into the future to collect power from water and other energy sources. That's why I think that even though Elon Musk has 5 male children, he's far more interested in sending people to Mars instead of raising his own kids. Because who can honestly give 5 children enough attention when he's trying to change the world with mostly taxpayer money? He probably understands that if he makes humanity a multi-planet civilization, then the name Elon Musk will always be attached to the planet Mars. In a sense, he would buy a place in the history books by using his brain. Then just imagine if he came back in another life and recognized his accomplishments from death to rebirth. Just imagine if someone like Tesla returned to see the accolades and praise that he once received. Wouldn't that be something worth doing if you believed in Tibetan Buddhism? Just imagine how crazy it would be to see how the world saw you from one lifetime to the next. Imagine being able to see what you're going to do in another life. Then life is no longer about passing on genes and raising children, but instead building a legacy from one conscious event to the next. I know I'm getting way out there for some of you, but some of my personal experiences have shown me that these ideas are not so far-fetched. Maybe one day I'll share them to some extent. Anyways, that's all I've got to say for today. Thanks again, Orlando, for your donation, and I hope you enjoyed this topic, and I also hope that everyone can check out your link. Also, don't forget to check out the MGTOW mystery link, and also like this video. As for everyone else out there, please follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook to get tomorrow's video today. Thanks for taking your daily dose of red pills. And remember, a red pill a day keeps the shallow end of the gene pool away. So enjoy the rest of your day, and cheers.